Hello everyone and welcome to Religion Reconsidered. My name is Jack Fernan and today on the podcast we're travelling to East London to the Singh Sabha Sikh temple in Goodmayes to talk to Amandeep Singh, a practising and baptised Sikh. I arrived at the temple, or Gurdwara as the Sikhs call it, in the morning where I met Amandeep, who welcomed me with a big hug and a huge smile. Before having our conversation, he wanted to show me around the Gurdwara and we started outside at the Nishan Sahib, the flag that flies outside most places of Sikh worship. The Nishan Sahib has been a pillar and symbol of the Sikh faith and its struggle against spiritual and physical oppression, which we look at in the conversation. Amandeep then showed me the prayer room that houses the Guru Granth Sahib, the holy book of Sikhi, where we had a brief meditation followed by some delicious kada prasad, which is a sweet dough-like food that is offered to people after prayers. As we went to prepare for our recording, we met with Amandeep's friend Raj, who joined us in the recording room. Very quickly from coming into the Gurdwara, I felt a great hospitality on the part of my hosts. But as you'll hear, Amandeep makes clear that it is not hospitality, but connection, a theme he comes back to throughout our conversation as he stresses its importance not only in our spiritual lives, but in our communities. We also speak about some of the history of the Sikh faith and how it has established itself as a great force against persecution of all types. We finish up speaking about the foundational opening lines of the Guru Granth Sahib, the Ik Onkar, and what it means for a connected world. Following my conversation with Amandeep, I spent a couple more hours with Raj, who would take me to the nearby and newly renovated Gurdwara in Barking. Here, there was a school group going on tour, a group of women holding a prayer group, people sitting in the prayer hall in meditation, and of course the volunteers in the kitchen preparing for the lunchtime rush. It was a buzzing and vibrant community, with everyone involved and contributing. The food served was delicious, and I was told it was a relatively small service of roughly 80 people. To me, it was a great example of people coming together and engaging, as you will hear Amandeep describe, in deep connection. If you like the show, please subscribe to check out more and give us a like or a review and share it far and wide. We have more content on our Instagram page at Religion Reconsidered, including some pictures from the Gurdwara if you want to check that out. And as always, thank you very much for joining us and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Amandeep Singh, thank you very much for having me into the Gurdwara here in East London.
It's been an absolute privilege to welcome you in. Thank you for thinking of us and being our guest.
No, it was, very interesting. And coming in here this morning, we did a quick tour this morning. And you've sort of taken somewhat of a teaching role around here. I know that you have your Instagram where there are some reels of you doing your teaching. So that's obviously become a bit of a part of your life. But can you tell me about how you took that next step of being not just an ordinary believer, let's call it, but taking a sort of more active role in teaching and I suppose as a part of that really embracing the religion as a central part of your life?
Yeah, sure. I'll be honest with you. I think there's a concept in the social sciences called social proof. And the idea is that one understanding of it is that you learn the value of something, an object or whatever it might be, by seeing how others perceive that object. So when you're a baby, you had no value for gold. But watching others, as you grow older, buying and selling gold in stock markets or wearing it around their neck or almost worshipping it in some materialistic ways, you learn the value of gold, right? For me, I've been brought up around the Sikh temples, coming here sort of all my life. But what happened one day was I was at my office, with my legal office where I practice, and which was next door to the temple. And the priest came out, and quite a funny story really. They said, we've got a bunch of children from this local schools that have come to visit the temple, but the guy who was supposed to show them around didn't come. So would you mind just popping out and just taking them on a quick tour? No experience in this before. And I did it, and obviously the children had a great time, and we showed them the free kitchen where we serve people indiscriminate of religion or caste or creed or whatever. And we showed them the prayer hall and things like this. But I remember very clearly, on the way out, somebody asked me about the Nishan Sahib, one of the teachers, in fact. And they asked me about the flag, and I started talking about the flag a little bit. And I was just talking about the flag. As I was talking about it, naturally, I was looking at the flag. And then when I finished speaking about the Nishan Sahib, because she'd asked me about what that was, what it represented, I turned around and she was completely in tears. And at that point, I realised, wow, I really don't know the value of what we have. It was through seeing someone else's reaction that hadn't been had the privilege of being around these things. We become desensitized, don't we, by the blessings that we have in our presence every day. So it was watching other people's reaction and seeing that for the first time when you see these things, how grateful you should be. And I realised that I've got a responsibility that if I know these things, to share these things to those that may need it. Incidentally, a lot of those teachers would then start coming back to the temple outside of school, nothing to do with school visits, to meditate and be part of the service and just improve their own spiritual connection. So I found a great deal of satisfaction in that, and that was where my process of growth in terms of sharing those teachings really came from.
I mean, it's an incredible thing to sort of be able to share it with children and share it with the people in the community around you. But there's something about the Gurdwara as being a place, you sort of mentioned that you serve food to people without paying attention to caste or creed or religious backgrounds. There is a real sense of community here and people coming to experience what goes on here. Who are the sort of people that do come, and what interaction do you have with them that come?
Without getting into cliches, literally every background you may imagine, every denomination of background that you may imagine, they come to the Sikh temple, and that's in keeping with the intentions. So I was talking to you just before we started recording. The Nishan Sahib, which is the flag which flies outside the Gurdwara, is literally saying it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, where this flag flies, you are welcome. And so in keeping with that calling is the answer to that call, that anybody and everybody should feel welcome. We have Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, people of different sexual orientations, or even as the current languages, genders and so on and so forth. Nobody is discriminated against in terms of their ability to come here and be served, and if they're being persecuted, to be protected. Raj, you can't see this, but Raj has just turned up with some biscuits.
With some biscuits. But I think the biscuits as well is what you're talking about. There's the overwhelming sense of hospitality when you come in here. You're being offered things the whole time, and in both a spiritual and a physical sense.
If I'm honest with you, so hospitality is a very nice word on the face of it. But there's a deeper meaning that's a word that we associate with people being kind to us. So people were hospitable, right? Unfortunately, I think that it doesn't really encompass. It's become to do with, like, if somebody's coming to your office, you'll offer them a glass of water before you sit down and try and negotiate a contract. You know, these guys they were nice to us or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a deeper word that we're looking for, and that's connection. And so there is hospitality here, but if you look deeper, I think you'll be honest, and you say that when you came here, even as you came as a guest, you didn't feel disconnected, you felt connected. And that's really important, the distinction between hospitality, because what hospitality is I don't like hospitality. Hospitality is about duality. Hospitality is you're coming to me, I'm going to serve you, you're an outsider coming to the insiders, and we've got the inside track, and we're going to make you feel nice as our guest. Right? What I like about the Sikh temple is that we don't have hospitality, we have connection. When you came here, from the moment that you came into the upstairs, the Darbar where we were doing the meditations, you were nothing but connected. You were nothing but a part. And when we finish this wonderful chance to share, when you go downstairs into the Langar hall and you partake in that Langar, you're not going to be a guest in that Langar hall. If you want to, and if you're appropriately, if your hands are clean, etc., you can partake in the distribution of that service as well. The real gift here is a gift that you get, is a chance that you get to serve. You're not here as a guest. You get to go in the kitchen and you get to serve, and that creates connection. And connection is what we're all striving for. It's connection, the absence of connection, that is the source of pain. So I don't like hospitality, but I love connection, and there's a big distinction between the two. Do you feel connected to what I'm saying?
I do, yeah. And I think as you sort of mentioned that and explain that out, it's exactly right. In the prayer hall, sometimes you go into other religious sites and there is a a point at which the believers can go and the non-believers have to stay outside, or there's things for the initiated, let's call them, and the uninitiated have to be, separated, which, there is a place for that in certain circumstances. But here it's come on in. You may not know exactly what is going on in the scenario, but if you come in with sort of an open, compassionate heart, you are more than welcome to be involved in the prayer. That's what happened with you, and you made me feel that.
Well, I can't take credit for that. That's the fragrance of where we are. If you walk into a florist's and then you go home and your wife says you smell lovely, you can't take credit for that. That's the fragrance of where we are. And that will be, and this is what really draws me to the Sikh faith. I wasn't always a practicing Sikh. What draws me to the Sikh faith is the lived experience. The lived experience is one of connection. So you'll see, for example, I've got a turban on my head and I've got a beard. So in the worldly sense, in an external way, you may look at me and judge that I'm further down that path, yeah? Raj, who's my best friend, I love him the best in the world, keeps uncut hair. He's not quite made that commitment yet. But there's no distinction from the way that we received each other. And in fact, I told you that he's actually helping out in a great deal. He's very connected to the services that the community are provided and facilitates their provision to other communities outside that. So the lived experience here, and hopefully you won't tell me otherwise when you go downstairs into the Langar hall and you have that food, and if you choose to get up and wash those dishes and decide to go behind the counter and serve that food, your lived experience is one of connection. And you're quite right. I think this is where we're going wrong in the world. There is this need to progress beyond levels. And then the idea is like you started here, but in certain temples, and I'm not going to denigrate anyone's faith, but you've had your own experiences, so you'll speak to your own experiences. You go to certain temples, you go to certain other places of worship, and there's hierarchy there. And the idea is that you're making progress. But those aren't the foundation teachings of faith. The foundation teachings of faith isn't to rise, but it's actually to lower yourself. And it's at the feet, as you wash the disciples' feet, as you'll know from the Abrahamic faiths, it's as you lower yourself, as you recognise that you're actually the lowest of the low and actually connected to everybody in the same place. That's where you're really making progress. That's where you're really rising, in inverted commas, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Bringing sort of not praise on yourself, that's the wrong word, but bringing, I suppose, holiness on yourself by lowering yourself.
Yeah.
I thought we might have a slight change of tack and talk about sort of the establishment of the religion itself, because of the major 5 religions that there are in the world. Sikhism is, let's call it the most recent or the youngest. So it came about in the Punjab in sort of the 15th century. What was sort of the climate that Guru Nanak entered into, and what was sort of his initial or main message?
Brilliant. I love this question. This is a question I get asked all the times. Yes, the Sikh faith is the youngest of the world's major religions. We've been around for around 500 years, and I'm so proud of that. Look what we've achieved. We are the biggest. In terms of the stats are just insane. We won't have time to get into the metrics of it right now, but we are very proud of that we're the youngest religion in the world. How it came to be is even more a sense of great pride. So one of the greatest scholars of the Sikh faith is Bhai Gurdwara, and he says in the mother tongue, "Bi suni pukar datar prabh Guru Nanak jagam mahi bathaya." They say that the world was crying out in pain, in suffering, and hearing the cries, the prayers of the world, Waheguru, God themselves, incarnated in the form of Guru Nanak and came to the earth to save its own creation. So if we look at that's the prophetic description of why Guru Nanak came to the earth and how they did. If we look at it in the context, we can understand it a bit deeper. So if you look in the world 500 years ago, what was the world like before Guru Nanak came? The world was very divided. There was massive division between the 2 major religions of the Indian subcontinent. There were Hindus on one side and there were Muslims on the other side. They both were at ends with one another. One is monotheistic and the other is polytheistic in that they worship many deities. One is vegetarian and the other eats meat, and those that are considered as meat eaters by the Hindus are impure. And so they're massively at loggerheads with one another, and those divisions were deep. There was fighting, there was warring. And when the Mughals had invaded India, they were bringing Islam, and that was being spread, putting it bluntly, by the sword. So if you were offered the opportunity to convert to Islam, you were given tax benefits to convert to Islam, and if you refused to do so, you were then met with death. You would have been told to convert to Islam, or you'd be beheaded. There was actually occasions under the Mughal regime where bags of rice were being offered to the heads of Hindus that were brought to governance. Bags of rice and rupees were being offered if you brought the heads of other faiths to government, to say, look, these people wouldn't convert. So we're talking about a very barbaric regime. The tyranny that was being met out was beyond any violence we could even imagine. I mean, some of the accounts of what was being having to be endured just to maintain your faith, it's absolutely abhorrent. And it was in response to those sort of circumstances that the Sikh faith was born. So we spoke about people not getting together in the very early stages of that tyranny. And Guru Nanak would see all of these divisions, and they would do something very simple, but it would be very profound in its effect. They would raise a flag into the sky, which is what I alluded to earlier. And that flag would say that if you're hungry, if you're suffering through this persecution, because generally warring and disagreements brings famine. We'll know from current examples in the world, right? So India's divided in this way. Guru Nanak is talking to those that are suffering from this division and saying, if you're suffering, look into the sky, where you see this flag break the skyline, come to the base of that flag, and I'll feed you. And can you imagine that vibration across a war-torn, divided country by an indigenous population of Hindus and an insurging population of Muslims, both suffering at their loggerheads in terms of their views. And Guru Nanak is coming into the midst of that and saying, it doesn't matter to me if you're a Hindu, it doesn't matter to me if you're a Muslim. In the house of Guru Nanak, I'll feed you and I'll break bread with both of you as my brothers. And so the Sikh faith was born out of persecution. And that is really quite remarkable, that in the midst of war, that a rose would blossom. And that fragrance of that rose, the fragrance of that rose would be such that it would spread across the entire world. Now, as those disputes and the disagreements between those two major faiths grew deeper and deeper, and the Mughals sought to sort of use the iron fist much more vigorously, with much more persecutions and much more executions and tortures to those that wouldn't convert to Islam under that banner of Islam. It was at that point that the gurus then would say, whilst we offer the free kitchen to those that are hungry, we're also going to stand for those militarily that are being persecuted. And so we have this dichotomy here where the spiritual and the physical are married together, and the Guru has said you must be a perfect saint to feed your brothers that are hungry, and you must also have the ability to be a soldier to defend those women and children that are being persecuted. So the aspects of the Sikh faith have always come with the spiritual and the physical. We never abandon one for the sake of the other. Again, which is something quite remarkable. You see these criticisms in other faiths where it's totally spiritual, and then someone will come with a tank and roll over you, and there's just your grave left. On the flip side, where there's just the warring aspect, or the ability to wage war or stand up with a sword, but there's no compassion behind those actions. But here, the Guru is saying, feed those that are hungry and have the ability to stand for those that are being tyrannically persecuted. So again, the Sikh faith is born out of persecution. It was born, if you will, in answer to the prayers of those that were suffering, either through famine and the free kitchen, or the Gurban, the sword that all baptized Sikhs will wear for those that are being persecuted. And I just flipping love that, man. I just absolutely love, like, as I say that to you, it's like I'm hearing it for the first time.
Yeah.
I'm just totally in love with that modern take, because there is no one that can pick that apart. People bring their own knowledge to a situation and they go, what about this? And they come from a place of compassion because that's their arena. Others will say, yeah, but what about if you're weak? But both aspects of the physical and the spiritual are represented, and they're married together in a way that can't be undone.
Yeah.
And as I said before, I just flipping love that, man.
because it is an interesting idea to have the religion actually make that dichotomy, spiritual, temporal, so integral to the very idea of what's going on and how we engage with one another and engage with the world. And you see it in the temple here because as part of, you sort of spoke about when you go into the prayer hall, there is the spiritual aspect of coming and prostrating yourself before the guru. But then at the end you go and have that delicious sweet, which is, physical sustenance. And, I think when the Buddha was doing his thing, he sort of was fasting and reached a point where he said, okay, no, I need to have some sort of sustenance in it to be able to pray properly. And there's a similar thing here, but it's very profound and prominent in the way that the religion still continues to engage with both their followers and people in the outside community. But from what you're saying, that was sort of foundational at the time of at the formation of the religion.
I mean, I would say entirely using a very simple way. If you're speaking about love, but people are hungry, they can't hear what you're going to say. They're too busy rubbing their tummies and saying, how am I going to eat? Yeah. You try and explain to someone at a work meeting at 2:30 when they're about to miss their lunch, what they were supposed to do as they're having a glycemic attack and their eyes are glazed over. They're like, yeah, whatever you say, just let me go to my table and eat my Subway. You know what I mean? So but on a deeper level, people are not hearing you spiritually. They're not going to hear your pains. Forget physically hearing you. But it's very difficult not to hear someone has fed you, man. It's very difficult not to hear someone as your brother that's broken bread with you. So it was in the actions of one who was sincere in their love for humanity that we see prayer. I mean, we see an understanding of prayer as a prostration. What greater prostration than to bend at the hip to give someone roti, to give someone chapati? What greater prostration is there? If you think of we think of prostration purely as a physical act of bowing to the Lord, right? But if we see God in everybody, what greater prostration is there? What greater meditation is there than to lower yourself and bow before your fellow man and go, your family need food. And then stand up and say, who is it that's bothering you out there? Let them know that we stand for your right to be free. And as I say that, I just flipping love it, man. Like there is nothing on this earth that comes even remotely close to that philosophy being encapsulated in the world, and I'm just totally in love with that concept, that ideal. I'm far from it, but it's the aspirations that drive me forward. So it's not myself or the Sangha, the congregation. It's the ideals that we strive towards that I just am totally in love with. Yeah.
I mean, we're all imperfect humans working towards betterment. But the other thing I find interesting about Sikhism as being a relatively young faith is that it was born at a time where the world was starting to gain an understanding of itself as a global whole. In the Bible, that they talk about the peoples of the world, but it would be hard to really think that the people writing those words understood that there was people in South America or North America or Australia even. But by the time that Sikhism was coming around, there were people that had travelled extensively, and there was an idea that the world was much bigger and more diverse than many people had understood. And Guru Nanak went on many journeys throughout the world and saw, basically all of Asia.
They went further east in that they would travel. They travelled. They're recognised historically as the third most travelled man in the world. They travelled 28,000 kilometres on 4 journeys that would take them in the different directions of the earth. They came so far east as Rome. There is an account in the Vatican where Guru Nanak Bir came to visit the Pope. It's actually recorded in the archives. It's very difficult to elucidate the information because when he went there, he would speak of a philosophy that hadn't yet matured. He would speak of freeing slaves. that the idea of one man owning another would be wrong. This is what he spoke to the Pope of. This was the discourse that he spoke of in the Vatican. They keep records of all those that would come and speak and visit. So obviously that's not a very popular thing that the Vatican will openly advertise, because it speaks of a man coming in and saying you're out of touch with real compassion. Why do you have the ability to have slaves? Why do you have the ability to lower a man to the feet of another? We're all equal under the eyes of God. So he would travel all the way to the east. There's records of him west, I should say, as having come to the middle of Europe. So yes, but even that doesn't really do justice, because this is one that is connected. Probably jumping into a very deep conversation from geography now, but when we go beyond the metaphysics, the understanding is that we're actually all connected. And the way that the Guru describes this, they say that just as waves of the ocean might momentarily think that they're separate and distinct, and they compare themselves to other waves, but if they looked at their root, they would see that they're all part of the ocean. In this way, Guru Nanak is connected. They are that one that is fully conscious of their connection. So they wouldn't necessarily need to travel to understand the conscious mind of someone in China. They were connected to that mind in a way that we can't even fathom. The idea of the travelling, I suppose, was not for a broadening of education, for they're part and parcel of that whole ocean of love. They are connected to the whole ocean. The travelling, in my mind, was to spread a teaching that had long since been forgotten, or perhaps not even yet learnt yet, one of brotherhood, one of breaking bread together as one. And so the travels weren't to gain knowledge that Sikhi would then flourish with that knowledge, because Sikhi has got that perfect knowledge from the source. The idea was to spread that information and those teachings through action.
Yeah, because there's that sort of international aspect to what they're talking about, and it's not international in the sense of let's convert everyone and make them let's see the world as we see it. It's let's engage with them as they are and appreciate that there are differences, but also recognize that there is that oneness to humanity as a whole.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the message of the Sikh gurus were, if you're a Muslim, be a devout, sincere Muslim. Do away with hypocrisy and undertake a namaz from a place of love. Yeah. If you were a Hindu, do away with anything that is beyond sincere devotional worship. The Guru would never speak to convert. This is and I think that message, ironically, would win the love of many that would then seek the truth. Imagine someone coming to you and selling you what you already are.
Yeah.
But the best version of you, improving your condition in your own plight. You're going to fall at the feet of that teaching, right? So the Guru was never about that. To give you an example of that in action, the sixth Guru would build a mosque for Muslims. They didn't have one in an area. Where are you going to see that as an example from another faith? The ninth Guru was approached in a very dark time, extremely dark time, when the Muslims, the Mughals, were invading, as I alluded to earlier, and seeking to convert everybody by force across the Indian subcontinent. And Wazir Khan, who'd been sent by the emperor to Kashmir. Kashmir is like the Cambridge University, the area of great knowledge. If you wanted to learn about the Hindu scriptures, the Vedic scriptures, you would go to Kashmir. It's like the hub, the Silicon Valley, if you will, of the teachings, right? So the idea was the Mughals would send soldiers there and say, let's convert all of the teachers. And if the teachers will give up their faith and become Muslims, then they will start propagating Islam to their students. And then it'll be a way to win over this duality that exists of Islam and Hinduism in India. Aurangzeb famously writes in his diary, which is in the British Museum, that I will not rest until the whole of Hindustan, India, is converted under the banner of Islam. So these soldiers have gone to these 5,000 Kashmiri Pandits, the most educated, learned scholars of the time, the greatest professors, and say, you've got to give up your faith or we're going to kill you. We're going to take your heads. And they would come to the Guru, and the Guru will say, I will fight for your right to be Hindus. I mean, it's just remarkable. So these 5,000 Hindus, they send their leaders, 14 to 16 of their leaders representing those contingent different denominations of Hindus, one of them whose name was Gurdwara. They would go to the ninth Guru and say, look, we're not Sikhs. We are Hindus, but we've heard that under your banner, there is a right to be free and to practice your faith freely. We're being persecuted. We're being told to give up our faith. Will you stand for us? And famously, the Guru would go and fight for their right to be free. So This idea of conversion, this idea of one-upping somebody, it's such a basic two-dimensional sort of shopkeeper mentality that we have in the world. Like, let's try and convert these people. The Guru was like, no, that's not the way. There are truths that were here before we came, and there's truth in what we teach now. It may have been lost before we came, and the Guru would be bringing about a resurgence, a renaissance of those teachings. And he would say to those Hindus, stand firm in your faith. I will stand also with you, that you should be firm in your faith, and we will stand for you also. So it's just, there has never been a case in history where you have an example of someone making the ultimate sacrifice of giving their own life in defense of somebody else's right to practice their own faith. There are many examples of great martyrs that have stood for their own faith. The most notable, most famous example would probably be Jesus Christ, right? Who stood for the rights of the freedoms of those that would be his disciples, right? There are many that will stand for their own. But for someone to have the daya and compassion to see the suffering of another community and be willing to die for their right to practice their faith, only the Guru, only the ninth Guru of the Sikhs in history has been recognised, and the Sikhs that would follow those examples. He would ultimately give his life. He would give his life and go and challenge the emperor and say, if you can't convert me from my faith, you must leave these people to practice their own. And so he would make the ultimate sacrifice. He was actually beheaded in defence of the freedoms of those others. So when you see people around trying to convert, I just look at that and I just think that it's such a arrogant outlook that you think you should know best. Like you know better than the world religions of that person's thousands of years of heritage. Like you really think you can come along and just upgrade this person.
Yeah.
But no one looks at it that way. Everyone thinks that they're going to get saved if they save somebody else. But in the context of this conversation, how benign does that now sound? When the Guru is saying, "Look, no, your right to practice your faith is your sovereign right, is your sacred right, and it's so sacred, in fact, that I'll give my life for your right to be free." That is religion. That is compassion. That is dharma. We say that is righteousness in action. It wasn't about counting numbers or getting people to convert. It was about standing for freedoms and ultimately representing religion in your actions for your courage and your inability to look past the fact that they're another. Who said they're another? Because they're Hindus. They're just our brothers. The teaching of the Guru was what, remember? That we sit together and break bread as one. Where's that teaching if we're going to stand by and watch our Hindu brothers being persecuted? Where's that teaching if our Muslim brothers haven't got a mosque to pray in? It's a different, the world's not ready. The world hasn't caught up with the Guru's teachings from 100. The world, everyone talks about religion being out of date. The world's got Amazon. It's got Nike. It's got 24-hour Prime.
Yeah.
Yeah. It hasn't got Sikhi yet.
Yeah. It's still sort of.
That's the truth of it. We're still catching up. We haven't got to a place yet where we're standing together as one, beyond the lip service of hospitality.
Yeah.
How we get to connection, right?
You mentioned a few times there about the Sikhs being, born out of persecution, but also getting to a stage of defending other people. And the Sikhs now have a bit of a reputation as being warriors. You know, I was reading yesterday that in the Indian army, there's still a sort of specific Sikh regiment, and it's one of the most decorated in their history.
I'll give you some stats that will just blow your brains, yeah?
Yeah.
Sikhs make up less than 2% of the Indian population. We've got 1.6 billion people in India, right? Sikhs make up less than 2% of the Indian population. They make up 45% of the Indian armed forces. I'm going to repeat that for you, because every time I say it, it blows my mind. Sikhs make up 2% of the Indian population. From that 2%, half of which is male and female, Sikhs make up 45% of the Indian army.
Yeah.
80,000 Sikhs were answering the call. When Winston Churchill was calling out for a certain despot to be removed, a certain tyrant to be... I love you, Raj. no one can see this, but as I'm on this podcast, my older brother, who's many years older than me, he's bringing biscuits and masala tea around. So I got distracted there. I'll have a biscuit, thank you, brother. So when those teachings go beyond the Indian subcontinent, as you referenced internationally, when there's a certain tyrant looking to wipe the Jews off the earth in the Second World War. This had nothing to do with Asia at the time, if you think about it. Beyond the political stirrings with Russia, and we can get into that on a different day. But in reality, this wasn't India's fight. But 80,000 Sikhs would answer this call of that community, because it's inbred in us that if someone's being persecuted, they might be persecuted in Europe in the initial stages of that fracas. But it's our call to answer. So hundreds of thousands of Sikhs, disproportionate numbers of Sikhs, by reference to their population representation, hundreds of thousands of Sikhs would answer the call, and 200,000 would lose their arms and legs, and 80,000 would lose their lives defending the freedoms of strangers from a faraway land that were being persecuted. And again, that just blows my brains. There was no affiliation, there was no dog in the race there, putting it bluntly, but for the fact that you had a right to die defending the freedoms of another community that needed protection, right? Winston Churchill, who's a man who didn't want to mince his words, if you listen to his speech on Sikhs after the Second World War, he says, and I'm just paraphrasing here, he says, "Twice we have called upon the Sikhs, and twice they've answered the call. We are forever indebted to their contributions and their sacrifices in having been victorious in our ultimate success in overcoming this tyrant." It was in response to that war effort that Sikhs won the most Victoria Crosses, which is the most coveted, the most decorated achievement. You can only receive it through courage and death, being married together, right? And the Sikhs are the most decorated winners of the Victoria Cross in the entire world. And you've got to understand, we're a very small number of people. I'm not talking pro rata, we're the smallest proportion of people, but it's been bred into us that if you're lucky enough to die defending the freedoms of another, that's a good death. That's a great life.
Yeah, to go out and defend.
To go out and defend, man. That I it's such a blessing. Like we every day, 3 times a day, we do our collective prayers as a community, and in each of those 3 prayers, we say, "Jinna Singha, Singaniana Taram Headsis Tite Band Katai Kopriona Haya Charkarian the Charet and Arenal Jarai. We say, we give reverence, Jinna Singha, Singania, those Sikhs and those Singhs and Singania, they gave their lives, but they never gave up their dharam, meaning that they stood true against an injustice, be it Hitler, be it Aurangzeb, who was seeking to convert Hindustan under the banner of Islam, be it whatever injustice is being propagated, not just physically, I might add, but spiritually as well. Currently, the fight is not a physical fight, but it's winning over your minds against social media, against the carnal lusts, and so on and so forth. So every day we give praise and remembrance to those that are winning the spiritual fights, but also winning, more relevantly, having won those physical fights and having made those sacrifices.
Yeah, and there's you see those images of those Sikh soldiers from World War II, and they're just dressed remarkably. They just look so impressive. But the fierceness that comes with that warrior, it's a fierceness that can only come from such a depth of place within themselves. If you're fighting for a government, how much of yourself can you give to that fight? But if you're fighting for your faith, but also against persecution in general, I guess that's where that sort of real
well, if you go one step further, if you're fighting, our faith was never in. As I said earlier, our faith was never in the question. It was never a dog in the race here. But our faith is that we should extend the hand of freedoms for everyone to enjoy through their own faith. So we were never fighting to defend. Our faith was never in danger. It was the fact that others were in danger and their faiths were. That was the point I was trying to make. That there's never been an example in history of such selfless sacrifice. There's never been an example in history, in stats, or even the specific examples. If I gave you some examples of some of the Sikhs and the sacrifices they've made for their common brother from a different faith, you would just be in shock. But that would be a podcast, perhaps. We could have a podcast just on sacrifice, and you would be, honestly, you'd be blown away. And even though I know what I'm saying, as I say it, I will be blown away again. Because every time I end up catching my breath. I have to catch my breath. So yeah, in answer to your question earlier, we're a community that has internationally recognised because of the sacrifices that we have made for others. And I'm really proud of that. I can't say I'm proud of that. It's not my giving. I'm very grateful to be a part of that heritage, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Because
it teaches me who I should be. And in reality, my victory should be met with a bit of humility, because look at the forefathers that I come from. You know, we have big shoes to fill.
You've spoken a little bit about some of the gurus. You mentioned the first, the sixth, the ninth. Can you tell me a little bit about, firstly, the line of human gurus, 1 to 10, and then the decision, I suppose, by Guru Singh to then make the book the 11th and eternal guru?
Yes. So we, on our channel, I'm going just to plug the channel if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
We've got a channel which is called Basics of Sikhi, which is, it's my pride and joy to be a part of and serve. It's a charity that brings Sikh philosophy to a Western-speaking world. So all of the lectures are in English, and we translate the scriptures and the philosophy. We've actually done a series called 11 Weeks, 11 Gurus, where we have an episode on each of the gurus and the teachings that particular guru have brought. The title of the series is called The Travelling Light of Guru Nanak. So it goes from Guru Nanak all the way to Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So that will take about 11 hours to go through. Each one's an hour's an episode. You can find that on YouTube. But in essence, Guru Nanak would come and they would bring the Nishan Sahib, the flag, and that teaching of oneness through Langar. Guru Angad Dev Ji would bring, these are just a very, very brief of over. As I said, we could talk about each of the gurus for hours and hours and hours. Guru Angad Dev Ji would build upon those teachings, and they would bring the alphabet, that they would bring more written scriptures, and they would collate more prayers. Guru Amardas Ji would start to grow the temples where these teachings would take place. Guru Ram Das Ji is known as the guru that laid the foundations for perhaps the most famous of Sikh temples, which is the Golden Temple, which is the biggest kitchen in the entire world.
Yeah.
Ain't that flipping amazing, man, that the biggest kitchen in the entire world doesn't belong to a corporation, but it belongs to humanity.
What is it, 100,000 meals a day?
It is
150,000 meals a day.
So look at 150,000 meals a day on any given day.
Yeah.
you go Bandi Chhor Divas, Diwali, Vaisakhi, the days of remembering the physical incarnations of the gurus, which we call the Avtar Purb, or you would say birthday. The days of martyrs, the great days of specific martyrs, you're looking at 2, 3, 4 times that number. Guru Ram Das Ji would lay the foundation for the biggest kitchen in the entire world. Guru Arjan Dev Ji, the 5th Guru, he is perhaps most famously recognised as giving us the prayer of peace, and also he was challenged to change the teachings of the Gurus, which would ultimately become the 11th Guru. He was told to change some of the words to reflect upon Islam more favourably. He refused to change those teachings because they were delivered from the heavens. They are from God. They are the word of God. They are the form of God. And so famously, he became the first Shaheed, the first martyr. Or not the first martyr, we say the king of the martyrs is what I should say. Shaheed and the Sirtaj, meaning the greatest martyr. He's famously recorded as being tortured to death for refusing to change one word of Gurbani, teaching us the very limits of what it means to have courage and humility, and also at the same time to stand steadfast and never change your principles. The 6th Guru would give us the sword in response to that and say that Guru Arjan Dev Ji, the 5th Guru, has taught us the limits of humility. He was tortured to death, the 5th Guru, by being made to sit on an iron plate whilst a hot burning iron plate, while white hot sand was poured upon their head and their flesh was torn from their body. All the while he would remain in complete sehaj, meaning stillness and connectedness to God. When that happened, the 6th Guru would give us the sword, and say that whilst the Guru before us taught us the meanings of humility, and that we should stand true in our principles and never always be in a state of peace, the sixth Guru would teach us that we should also have a sword, and we should wear a sword, and that we should stand up against injustice, that if somebody knocks on your door to take your principles away, or the principles of your brother and your sister, that you have the ability to wield the sword against injustice. The seventh Guru would give us great understanding of animals and veterinary care and the need to care for all beings of this earth. Famously, they would set up the first historically recorded veterinary, a hospital for animals, if you will, and they would give us much deeper teachings. The eighth Guru, who was only 6 years old, when he ascended the throne and became the Guru, they would go to Delhi at a time of great plague. Smallpox was just rampant and many would die, and they were accredited with stemming the flow of smallpox by essentially absorbing the responsibility unto himself spiritually. They actually physically left this world through smallpox, but they actually I'm not sure if that's historically accurate. I have to check that. But essentially, they were only the Guru for 3 years, but they were accredited with essentially stemming the flow of smallpox, teaching us that age is not a number, that you can be a spiritually elevated soul between 6 and 9 years old. The ninth Guru would give us an example of great sacrifice. As I mentioned earlier, they would, when being told that Hindus were being forcibly converted under the ban of Islam by a threat of conversion or losing your heads, under the auspices of Wazir Khan, who was the general that had been sent by Aurangzeb to Kashmir, they would challenge the emperor and go and face the emperor and say, I put a challenge before you. If you can't convert me by any means you deem appropriate to apply, you must leave our Hindu brothers to be free. He would ultimately be tortured to physical death, but because he stood true and didn't give up his faith, along with those martyrs that are joined with him, those Hindus were allowed to flourish. And so every year, it's rather beautiful actually, descendants of that community travel to the Golden Temple once a year to give thanks. So we have a cross-community relations there.
Yeah.
And then the 10th Guru is credited with giving us the physical form, having created the Khalsa, having seen the sacrifices of the Guru before, saying that now it's time for us to be baptized in the sword, that we should meditate every morning, and that we should also meditate upon our Lord, our Creator, the one who sustains us and gives us life. We should serve in the free kitchen that the first Guru seems so far away now. Guru Nanak would teach us a free kitchen, and the 10th Guru would say we should also meditate on the sword, and give us that teaching of Siri Bhagavati Ji Sahai, meaning that we should also meditate on that sword, which is the sword that allows us to have a protection system around our value system. So we have the spiritual, most beautiful part, and we have this idea that we should also be steel warriors, that if somebody should knock on the doors of ourselves or the doors of another, using a recent example in World War II, that we have the ability to stand against injustice, not just with our prayers, although the prayer is the source of all power, but also with the ability to take steel to that situation and be the deliverers, the arbiters of justice as well. And then the 10th Guru would give us a teaching that it's the 11th Guru throughout all of those 10 Gurus that was always the Guru. That it was the Sikhya, the teachings, Sikhya meaning the great teachings, which is what Sikhi comes from. I don't like this word Sikhism. Ism is like a Western understanding. It makes it like a. So we have the way that we pluralize that, we say Sikhi is a correct way to pronounce when we refer to Sikhi in the perfect tense. So the 10th Guru would say that the Guru in fact has always been the Sikhya, the teachings, and so Guru Granth Sahib Ji was installed formally. The scriptures of the Sikhs were made the 11th form of Guru Nanak, the 11th embodiment, the 11th body. Physically of the Guru of the Sikhs, but the teaching was that throughout all that time it was in fact the teachings of the Gurus which were written down and collated and collected by the Gurus themselves, I might add. That the teaching was that the Guru has always been those teachings. Interestingly, again, of the world's major religions, the Sikh faith is the only faith that can actually make the call that the scriptures were actually written by the gurus contemporaneously at the time of the gurus, and checked and signed off by the gurus themselves. So we know that the Bible was written many years. It was many years after the resurrection of Christ. And we know that in Islam that the Quran was written on the calves, on the skin of cows, but it wasn't collated, I think, till many years again after Prophet Muhammad would come and leave this world. But the Sikh faith was aware of the difficulties that can present to future generations, and they actually had the foresight to actually record the scriptures as they should forever govern the Sikhs and install them on the throne during the course of the 10th Guru's life. So, very short question. Can you tell me about the 10 Gurus? And I just sort of whittled through that. But if anybody wants to know more about that, the channel Basics of Sikhi, Sikhi, you'll find that on a YouTube channel. It's probably the most famous, it's probably the most recognised channel for Sikh teachings in the world. Probably?
In English speaking.
In English speaking.
Yeah. I'll put a link to it in
cool.
the description so people can go and check that out more. Because rushing over it like that, yes, you get a flavour for it, but there is that sort of sense of like continuity but building to create sort of a wholesome framework through which people can engage and learn to pray.
We're talking about 200 years. You know, they say Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, Sikhi was. Like, in 200 years, that happened. The raising of a flag to the... I mean, some historians say that if the 10th Guru hadn't stood against... Sorry, if the 9th Guru hadn't made those sacrifices and stood against that imposing force of conversion being brought by the sword under that banner of Aurangzeb, trying to convert everybody under the banner of Islam, the whole of the Indian subcontinent would be absent the Hindu faith. So in 200 years, this community's been seeded, if you will, sprouted and grown into a protector of world people. And I just think that's flipping amazing, man. Like that is divine. Like, there is no example again of civilization growing in that exponential way. I don't mean in terms of population numbers, for Sikhs have always been a very small number.
Yeah.
I'm talking about outreach in terms of population reach and population influence. Like, there's no example of a community so small having such a direct influence on the outcome of the shaping of the current world.
The first sort of sentence of the Guru Granth Sahib, the Ik Onkar, can you, and I realise we are...
I've got all the... You know what? You know what makes this really interesting? I'm really grateful to actually speak with you, because you have clearly undertaken some work here, and it's so wonderful seeing people do that, because it may be very, very surface level scratching that you've undertaken, but it's the intention behind that, and that creates not information. We're not here for information, but it creates an energy, because the person that's done that is coming from a place of intention to learn, and I think that's probably contributing towards the connection that we're experiencing right now. And deeply from my heart, I'm very grateful for that. Sorry to have interrupted you. Please.
No. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's. I think you're right. Like, in preparing for this interview and all the interviews I do, I always feel like you're just sort of scratching the surface. But
it's the intention behind that.
Yeah, but the Ik Onkar is sort of quite famous in the faith, similar to the opening of the Quran. Can you just go sort of briefly through what that is and why it has become so seminal?
Yes, I can. So I'll pronounce it, because the pronunciation has a great deal of influence to the meaning, and I'll explain that why in a second, but I'll just pronounce it first, and then that vibration will set the tone for where we go next. Ik Onkar. That is the very first prayer in the Sikh faith, and it begins with a number, Ik meaning one. Now, any word has an opposition. If I say black, you can say white, happy, sad, truth. If I say this is the truth, if I made a statement of this is the truth, you can say it's false. We can argue, but we can't argue with a number one. There's no opposition to one. There's no duality in one. So the Guru begins the teaching that we are all one. Let's not forget that we are all one. The Guru begins a teaching that we all come from the one. That our root, when we go into it, is just the ocean. You might be a wave right now, a very beautiful one. And I might be a little bit smaller than you, might be higher than you, whatever. But when we look to the root of it, there's just one ocean. All oceans are actually one ocean. We might give them different names, the Pacific, the Atlantic, whatever. There's no barrier between these oceans. It's just one beautiful ocean. The Guru refers to it as a Sukha Sagar, the ocean of love, the ocean of peace, right? Not the physical oceans, but... So the scriptures begin with the one. One meaning that there is one purpose that connects us all. One meaning there is one love that we all seek. Everyone wants love, right? Find me a man that doesn't want to have love and connection in life, right? So this one symbolizes many things. Above all of those is the fact that there is only one God. Now, I don't mean that in the monotheistic sense that it's taken. Like, for example, in the Abrahamic faith, they speak of one God, right? And yes, we agree with that. We propagate that truth that there's one God as opposed to two gods or five gods or things like that. But it goes deeper. What the Guru is saying is not that there's just one God out there, but no. In existence, there is just one energy, one life force, one God. We're all part of that God. We're all part and parcel of that. Nothing is beyond that Waheguru. Waheguru meaning God. Nothing is beyond, before or after that. So when we say one God, there is one all-encompassing Lord, which we are part of, because there is only one God. Now, people think that when we're saying one God, without hand gestures, it's like, I'm not saying there's one as opposed to two. What I mean is, all that there is in existence is just one. And the purpose of life is to experience oneness. And the great speakers of the day, they talk about oneness in using different language, like, for example, Eckhart Tolle, the great speaker of the day. Ultimately, they are going back to that teaching of Ik, of one. So this number is a number that we glance over and we get past it in terms of numeracy in infant school, right? But it's not about getting past it, it's about using your whole life to get to it, which is really interesting, because we get onto greater numbers, don't we? And I think there's a show now called Billions. It's like, let's just call the show Billions, you know? I haven't seen it, but it's like, let's get to higher numbers. All the while we're getting away from the one. So the number is much more than can be perceived at cursory glance. And there are great, great souls that have realized that oneness. And we go back to it every time we begin our prayers. We begin every morning, Ik, one. Then that mantra goes on to Om. So Ik, Onkar. So that central aspect of that mantra, Ong, is directly referencing the sound of creation, the vibration from which all creation emanates. So we know now, modern science is catching up, that when we were at school, we thought it was atoms and molecules. And then we thought it was molecules, and we realized beyond that there was atoms, right? And that was like cutting edge technology. And then we got to electrons, which are a minus weight on the scale. It's like, this is really, I remember learning about that at school, thinking this is really something, this is pivotal, cutting edge technology. And now they've gone beyond electrons. They go, there's just sound. Everything's just vibrating. The source of all creation is just sound. And that sound of creation is Om. How to follow that with the words. So from the one, that oneness, came the sound of creation. And then from that sound of creation came the creation. God means creation. So the very first mantra is all the teachings we ever need to know. There is one God. There is only one God in everything and anything and nothing. From that one emanated the sound of creation, the vibration of creation. And then from that sound came the God, the creation. So, or putting all of what I've just said over the last 3 or 4 minutes into 3 words, we have the Big Bang. There was just the singularity, which we now refer to, like modern physics stands with the notion of singularity. Or the Guru said it 550 years ago, what is singularity in Sanskrit? Ik, one. So way before we had these telescopes looking into space, the Guru was able to give us that teaching. Why? Because they are one with that oneness. They are the source of that creation. They are that one who is that creation. They are that Ik. And so they were able to give us a sound of creation, for they're the giver of creation. And then we have that mantra, Ik Onkar. There is one from which came the sound, from which emanates all of creation. And there are many that just meditate on that. That's called the Bij Mantra, meaning the seed mantra. How are you feeling right now?
Well, when you did the let's call it the vibration earlier, you feel it, like it like pulse, like you feel that vibration pulse through you, and you can sort of, it just emanates. And I guess when sitting in silence, it's hard to sort of be as aware of it as possible. But when there is that vibration coming from a human voice box, or even from a bell or something like that, you sort of become more aware of that vibrational aspect of what we are. And as I said, you feel it in a very deep part of your soul.
It has to be a lived experience, man. Like, if you're not feeling love, then like love is an experience, right? Or I keep going back to it. I just love this word so much. There's so much beauty in this word. It's about a connectedness, right? And what takes you to connection is what you should crave. We were speaking about it earlier, about addiction, right? And in a sort of linear sort of Western world, how we think that the opposite of addiction is sobriety, or the opposite of addiction is de-addiction, right? So like, if you go to a doctor and say, I'm addicted, they offer you pills to get you de-addicted, right? But the opposite of addiction actually is connection. Flipping on, man, our understanding of addiction and suffering is so wrong. Like we just assume that if you're suffering, you've got to find the Lord. You need to, yes, I'm not disputing that, but how do you find the Lord? How do you find Waheguru? You find them through connection, right? Like, as I say that to you, the hairs on my arm stand on end. It's like, I'm deeply, deeply in need of my community. I know that I'm nothing without the connection. Like I thrive on it. I don't know what kind of an addict I would be if I wasn't connected to the community. So when you speak of hearing that vibration, that wasn't from a voice box. It was a vibration of connection. And when you get to a place where and the great saints have got there, and it's for us to follow, where every step you're taking, you feel that vibration, literally, and every morsel of food. The Guru says, Jinas saas gras na visare har nama man manta. Dan says, say Nanaka puran soy santa. They say that one is a true saint. Jinas saas gras, on every step and every breath, all they can hear is Om. It's about connection, my friend. I don't know what, I know what our intentions were coming here today, but the beauty of life is you never know what you're going to get, right?
Yeah.
Forrest Gump.
Yeah, that's right. You know? Yeah, the box of chocolates. Yeah. Well, Amandeep, that's probably, I mean, with those sort of words of inspiration and a teaching of connection, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up the conversation.
Can I quickly just plug a couple of things?
Yeah, of course. Please.
I'm really honoured to be resident here at this. I have a resident slot at our local temple in East London. It started as a humble little thing with a few friends, and it's become quite a little gig, to be honest with you, where we have like hundreds of people come together once a month. where I share the Guru's teachings as I learn them, with English-speaking young seekers, excuse the pun, but like all different walks of life, people, and it's a real buzz, man. We get together once a month. It's the first Thursday of every month, and it's topical conversations. It might be anxiety, Last month we were talking about unsupportive parents when trying to undertake a religious path. So the kind of things that any person trying to navigate this world, this material world, from a spiritual outlook would maybe encounter or have to sort of look to overcome. And I'm really grateful to say it's become quite a little hub. So it's the first Thursday of every month. It's 7 to 8 p.m. We have a little meditation in there as well. And then after that, we have a collective connection through Langar. We sit downstairs and have a wonderful food together and have a little question and answer session, basically a huddle. So if anybody's in East London, we're at Singh Sabha London East in Goodmayes, the first Thursday of every month at 7 to 8 p.m. And if you want any further information on that, you can find it on my Instagram page, which is Amandeep Singh East London on Instagram, or Basics of Sikhi. Before we go, I just want to say, look, thank you so much for having me, man. I really, really have enjoyed spending time with you. And actually, I've actually learned through this conversation as well. So I'm actually really grateful for that too. Thank you.
No. Well, yeah, as I said, thank you very much for having me here, for sharing your story and your teachings. And I think this is probably something that we'll have to come back to again, because there's aspects of things that we spoke about which would be incredible to go into.
I have a feeling we're going to be, if the Lord is kind, we'll have a chance to sit and learn together again.
No, that sounds good. Well, thank you, Amandeep, and thank you everyone for listening.
And thank you to Raj for the tea and the biscuits.
Thank you to Raj for the tea and the biscuits, and for his wonderful company.